The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
New concern over mosquitoes. West Nile virus now reported in more than 30 states. And in fact, here in New York City tonight, they do plan to spray. And one Massachusetts town has taken major steps, closing parks and athletic fields. And Dr. Anthony Fauci is now home from the hospital, recovering from the West Nile virus himself.
It comes as the country's former top infectious disease official, Dr. Anthony Fauci, was recently hospitalized with the virus. The 83-year-old is now home and expected to make a full recovery.
Most everyone who gets West Nile doesn't even realize it. They're asymptomatic.
And David, those mosquito-borne illnesses are not passed person to person. As for that pesticide spray, officials say it is low risk, but you can stay indoors to avoid any potential side effects. David?
It is that time of year. Ariel Resha for us here in New York. Ariel, thank you.
All right, what's up, everybody? Happy Thursday. Hope you had a good day yesterday. Hope your day's off to a good start today. Anyway, I did want to start off a little bit talking about this West Nile virus that Dr. Fauci got. And again, I mean, it doesn't seem like this is something that is, spreading incredibly fast or anything like that. But I did think it was worth talking about a little bit and getting it on the radar. And then I'm actually going to talk a little bit today about sepsis and septic shock. I had been waiting to try and get this person, ironically, that I met on TikTok and see if she wanted to come on and talk about it. Her story is just absolutely heartbreaking. It really is. And I'm gonna read some stuff about it to you because I do think, and this kind of plays into West Nile virus a little bit, but more, I really do want to try and, like I've said before, get sepsis, septic shock. I want you to understand what that is, and I want you to understand what that potentially could look like, because again, I feel like there is just no awareness overall about this in our society. I mean, I don't know about in Europe and other countries, but definitely here in the United States, I think it is just not understood at all. And so a lot of times when somebody, out of the blue is getting sick or all of a sudden becomes sick and they go from like 0 to 100 in terms of their, being fine, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and looking like they're on their deathbed at 9 p.m. or something along those lines, a lot of times they have gone into septic shock and they have basically acquired or gotten or are in, that's probably the best way to put it, they are in sepsis. So what is sepsis?
Sepsis is a serious medical condition that happens when your body has an extreme response to an infection. Instead of fighting the infection like it normally would, the body goes into overdrive, causing inflammation throughout the body. This can lead to tissue damage, organ failure, and even death if not treated quickly. It's like the body's defense system starts attacking itself while trying to get rid of the infection.
So would you consider it like poisoning of the blood?
Yes, sepsis is often described as a type of blood poisoning, but it's a bit more complicated than that. The term blood poisoning usually refers to the presence of harmful bacteria in the blood, bacteremia, which can lead to sepsis. However, sepsis itself is the body's overwhelming and harmful response to any infection, not just bacteria in the blood. It can start anywhere in the body, and the immune system's extreme reaction causes widespread inflammation, which can lead to serious complications throughout the body, including in the blood, organs, and tissues.
All right, so that was a little help from ChatGPT and 11 Labs, and I asked ChatGPT those questions and then took it into 11 Labs. It is a little bit confusing still, and I think the confusing part is, I always kind of did think of it as blood poisoning, but it's really not blood poisoning, quote unquote. It's more the body's overreaction to something that's taken place. And when the body overreacts to something, it basically causes like extreme inflammation. And we've talked about inflammation a lot. One of the biggest markers of inflammation and of sepsis in general is a high white blood cell count. But let me give you an example. I want to try and provide some examples because I think this will be better understood through examples. So the gal I was talking about that I kind of connected with on TikTok, and it's just such a challenging situation for her. So I hope she is willing to come on at some point to talk about this. But let me read her post because I think this will really bring it, quite frankly, in focus in a very unfortunate way, but at least we can learn from this. So here's what she wrote, and man, this is brutal. This is brutal. But she said, my husband's septic shock story. And by the way, this has gotten over 10 million views, 27,000 comments. Truly, truly heartbreaking. But here we go. My husband passed away from septic shock on August 25th, 2023. He got sick on Wednesday afternoon and passed Friday evening. Many of you asked about his symptoms. Here's his story. He was up all night throwing up and had stomach cramps on that Wednesday. Thursday morning, he told me he felt constipated. I bought him medication. The medication didn't work, but he seemed to be improving. His fever broke and he wasn't throwing up anymore by afternoon on Thursday. He complained about his arm being sore later Thursday afternoon, but he said he must have slept on it wrong. He texted a coworker at 7 p.m. saying his fever broke and will decide if he's going to come to work that next morning, being Friday. I put my son to bed at 8 p.m. on Thursday night and checked on my husband. At around 9 o'clock, he was throwing up again, looked gray, and was sweating profusely. He wasn't making much sense, and his arm was completely limp. Let me read that part to you again. He wasn't making much sense, and his arm was completely limp. I had that situation with my dad, and I'll tell more about that after again. My in-laws then, Thursday night around 10 p.m., took him to the hospital while I stayed home with my son. He had now developed a blockage in his intestines and needed emergency surgery. He was put on a ventilator after surgery late Thursday night, early Friday morning. I fainted when I saw him. I think he knew because he started to kick his legs. Early Friday afternoon, they tried to attempt a second surgery to remove a blood clot in his arm. At this point, his kidneys were failing. Doctors came out to the waiting room Friday afternoon and told me he wasn't going to survive much longer Friday afternoon. My handsome husband passed from septic shock. Oh my God, this is so brutal. I forgot this part. My handsome husband passed from septic shock on our wedding anniversary. It's terrible. On Friday evening, surrounded by family and friends. Oh my God, I had forgotten about the part that he passed on their wedding anniversary. Anyway, that was her post on TikTok, and, I've reached out to her, and we had a little bit of a back and forth, and I basically just said, Karen, this truly brought tears to my eyes. I am so sorry for the loss of your husband. If you're interested, and I only say this because you were kind enough to post this so we could all learn from it, but I would love to honor your husband and bring you on the Deep Shallow Dive podcast to share this story and spread awareness of septic shock. Maybe people hearing his story can be the first step into saving other people's lives in his honor. Anyway, I'm not sure if she's going to come on or not. I mean, obviously, it's been roughly a year since that took place, and I can't even imagine how brutal that is. That's just brutal. But the reason I wanted to read that and share that is so you understand how fast this can take place. I mean, think about it. It was like he started feeling bad or off on Wednesday, And he passed away that Friday. And again, I've talked about my dad's situation with septic shock and sepsis. And by the way, I'll explain the difference in a second. But, his situation was, again, for those that didn't hear it when I talked about it originally, him and my mom were I think they were in like Palm Springs or Palm Desert with like a friend of the family. And then they came home. Everything was fine on a Sunday. And then they came home on Monday. And during the course of that weekend, a slow leak in his appendix started, I guess, putting whatever is leaking out of the appendix into his bloodstream. I think that's why I've always thought about sepsis as blood poisoning, because when they finally figured out that that's what it was, I thought to myself, okay, that leak of, probably garbage that his appendix was leaking out was going into his bloodstream and then causing, that blood poisoning. But I think more than anything, it was the inflammatory overreaction result. And I do remember when we took him into the emergency room, his white blood cell count was just like off the charts. And so when they put him on the high dose antibiotics intravenously through an IV, I remember asking the doctor and obviously like Googling everything I could on my phone while I waited. And really that was the main marker we were looking to come down, was his white blood cell count. And luckily by the morning, it did end up coming down. So anyway, that's one story. Let me add a little more context and, maybe a little more technical definition. Give this a listen. This is from a nurse that works at a hospital in Los Angeles.
Sepsis is a severe and systemic response to an infection. When a local infection occurs, the body's natural response is to send white blood cells to fight it effectively. But when this local infection goes untreated and gets into the blood, this reaction becomes systemic instead of local and actually ends up hurting the body instead of helping it. The damage is caused by the body's own severe inflammatory response to the infection. This inflammatory response causes white blood cells to enter blood vessels and release inflammatory markers. And these inflammatory markers cause widespread vasodilation and an increase in the permeability of blood vessel lining, which causes fluid to leak out of vessels. These two things together cause decreased SVR due to the vessels being dilated and hypovolemia from the leaky blood vessels. This in turn leads to hypotension, which leads to decreased tissue perfusion, which leads to the tissues not getting adequate oxygen. And if this goes untreated, can lead to severe organ damage.
All right, that was probably a little bit too technical, but I did want you guys to hear that. And I think really what happens is the overinflammation that takes place causes a lack of oxygen to get to the organs. And so the body literally starts shutting down. The kidneys start shutting down. Potentially the lungs get affected, but a lot of different body parts, basically start shutting down because they're not getting oxygen. And it really is, you're pretty much dying. All right, so let's go back to ChatGPT. I just asked him or her if he or she, I'm trying to be politically correct with ChatGPT. I said, can you give me some symptoms of sepsis so that I can help people understand what they should be looking out for?
Sure thing, Ray D. Here are some common symptoms of sepsis that people should watch out for. 1. Fever, chills, or feeling very cold. A high body temperature or feeling extremely cold can be a sign that the body is fighting an infection. 2. Rapid heartbeat, tachycardia. The heart may start beating faster than usual. 3. Rapid breathing or difficulty breathing. Breathing may become faster or more labored as the body tries to get more oxygen. 4. Confusion or disorientation. A person might seem confused, dazed, or have trouble thinking clearly.
I want to jump in real quick. That's a big one. And that was what I noticed in our dad that honestly got me the most concerned. And that's when I knew, okay, something is off here. He was just he was mumbling and he was just confused and almost this is going to be kind of funny and a not funny topic, but it was almost like he was like super drunk or something. Like he just was out of it, completely mumbling. And again, couldn't really even get up from off the couch or off the bed.
5. Extreme pain or discomfort. Sepsis can cause intense pain or a general feeling of being very unwell. 6. Clammy or sweaty skin. The skin may feel cool, clammy, or sweaty. 7. Low blood pressure. This can cause dizziness, fainting, or a feeling of weakness. 8. Decreased urine output. A significant drop in how much a person urinates can indicate the kidneys are affected.
All right, I think it really, the kidneys are such a huge part of that, because once the kidneys start to shut down, which that does decrease the urine output, I think that's when major problems, can really happen in a hurry. Remember the story of Karen's poor husband, Wednesday to Friday. Think about it. And this is a guy, I mean, from the pictures, it looks like he was in his mid-30s in great shape. You know what I mean? I could imagine with an elderly person or somebody that might have comorbidities or other issues, it could even happen faster because their immune system is probably even more compromised. All right, next thing, let's just talk terminology real quick. So I asked ChatGPT, what's the difference between sepsis and septic shock?
The difference between sepsis and septic shock lies in the severity of the body's response to an infection. 1. Sepsis. This is the initial severe reaction of the body to an infection. In sepsis, the body's immune system goes into overdrive, causing widespread inflammation, tissue damage, and potential organ dysfunction. It's serious but can be managed with prompt treatment. 2. Septic shock. This is a more severe and life-threatening form of sepsis. In septic shock, the inflammation and organ dysfunction are so extreme that they lead to dangerously low blood pressure, even after receiving fluids. The low blood pressure results in poor blood flow to vital organs, which can cause them to fail. Septic shock requires immediate intensive care and often life support measures. In short, septic shock is the most severe stage of sepsis, where the body's response to infection leads to critical conditions, particularly very low blood pressure, which can be fatal without urgent treatment.
All right, you know what? So I'm going to leave it there for today in terms of sepsis, but I definitely think I'm going to end up talking about this more. I've got a good friend, my friend Amber, reached out the other day when I mentioned it on actually Tuesday's episode, and she's going to connect me with kind of a sepsis expert. So hopefully I'll be able to bring a guest on to really talk about sepsis. But again, I do want to really stress when it comes to health and wellness, and I want to try to tie these things together a little, even though they're not really, I'm not saying they're related, but this West Nile virus that is spread by mosquitoes, or again, anything, as we head into the winter, and again, no meaning with this, but as we head closer to the election, I think crazy things are going to happen in this country. I really do. I think there's going to be a definite, I don't know, whatever. But my point is, be aware of your health, be aware of the health of your loved ones, your family members, your friends. And again, when it comes to this concept of getting some type of body inflammation reaction that starts as sepsis and then goes into septic shock, hopefully after listening to this, at least this is on your radar, and again, I think the biggest thing for me, and this is what I experienced with our dad when that happened to him due to the leak that was coming out of his appendix, was it was like, it just wasn't explainable how his health deteriorated so fast within a 24-hour period. It was talking to him, everything was fine, and then literally, in his case, it was maybe 9 or 10 hours later, it was just a disaster. And again, I said this before when I talked about it many episodes ago, but if you end up in a situation where somebody is just absolutely like, you just don't understand what's going on with them and you don't understand why they feel so terrible, call 911, get an ambulance there. More importantly, obviously, for all the vitals and blood pressure and all that, it's important. But more importantly, if you're going to try to take that person into the emergency room, and this applies in the United States, I don't know if it applies in other countries, but man, you do not want that person to be sitting in that emergency room for 3 hours, which seems to be the norm these days. Gosh, sometimes even longer. So when you do call 911 and they take the person in an ambulance, I mean, they go right into the ER. They're not taking them out of the ambulance and then say, okay, have a seat in the emergency room when we get to you. That doesn't happen. When they come in with an ambulance, they're basically going right into the ER. And so you bypass all that. So anyway, I hope this was beneficial. I hope more than anything, this just kind of gets this concept of sepsis and then the more severe version of septic shock on your radar a little bit. Like I said, I definitely will come back to this and hopefully be able to bring on an expert guest to really dive into this. And that is about it. I did want to kind of talk one more thing before I let you guys go today, and that is, the episode from Tuesday, which really talked about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his dropping out and, all of that, his speech. And again, in case you wanted to listen to his entire speech, it is on the back end of Tuesday's episode. You can listen to all 45 minutes. It's pretty insane to me, some of the conversations I've had with people that, again, didn't even listen to the speech, and it's just like venomous hate toward RFK Jr. And I just think it's so the wrong way to think about it. Like I said, and like the episode on Tuesday talked about, a big part of his speech geared around talking about health and the health crisis that really has gripped the United States when it comes to, chronic disease, childhood obesity, all of this stuff, the food system, unprocessed, highly processed foods. I'm sorry, not unprocessed. I wish it was unprocessed. So this stuff is really important. And again, I want to reiterate that when it comes to our health, and especially the health of the children, your children, I don't have kids, but, our children collectively in the United States, this is not a red versus blue issue. This is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. This is not a political issue. This is really a humanitarian issue that involves, our health and our children. So anyway, I'd ask you to try to separate your politics from health, no matter who says what. If it's Trump that says something positive about health, you should listen to that. If it's Kamala or Biden that says something positive about health, you should absolutely listen to that. If it's Obama, if it's Hillary Clinton, if it's Nancy Pelosi, if it's Lindsey Graham, if it's Mitch McConnell, I just named the members of the Uniparty. I don't care, though. Anyone that comes out and talks about health, I'm going to judge that take, and I'm going to really listen to anything that can benefit our health. I'm going to share anything that can benefit your health and that of your family. And again, like I said, more than anything, I just want to get this stuff on your radar. All right, that's it, everybody. Call a spade a spade. Talk to you soon.
The ending was terrific.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.